Hey folks, this is David at TED IELTS, and today we're going to do a grammar lesson. As you can see here, it says this is an essential IELTS grammar lesson, and that is not an exaggeration. This really is incredibly important for your speaking test, your writing test, for anything. And if you're just studying English and not doing IELTS, it is also essential grammar. What we're going to learn are sentence types. And there are 4 types of sentence in English. There's simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. There are no others. If you're writing anything that doesn't seem to fall into these 4 categories, it's not a correct sentence. You might find people using other types of sentence when they're writing informally, such as on social media or in a blog post or a novel. But for IELTS, you're going to have to use standard English, and these are the 4 sentence types that we have to work with. Right? But before we get into the actual sentence types, I need to explain a little something to you, and this is very important. If you don't know this, try and follow as closely as you can because this is the foundation of English grammar. So before we write any sort of sentence, we need to think of independent and dependent clauses. We'll look at the independent one first because that's what we're going to use to make the easiest sentence types. So an independent clause has 3 things. It has a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. So the subject is the person or thing, usually at the start of the sentence, that does the verb. So here's an example. Bamboo is an amazing plant. So in this sentence, as you can see, the blue highlighted word bamboo, bamboo is the subject of our sentence. What does it do here? Well, here we're actually using the verb to be. So this is rather than an action, it's a state. So the verb is to be. In this form, it is. So bamboo is. And we're going to complete that thought, an amazing plant. Because the whole sentence, the whole clause gives us a complete thought, by which I mean there's nothing else we need to know to understand this idea. This is an independent clause. Subject, verb, and complete thought. Of course, we could use other verbs. It doesn't have to be to be. We could say bamboo grows very quickly, or bamboo makes up the diet of pandas, or something like that. But in any case, subject, verb, complete thought. That's how we make an independent clause. And one independent clause by itself is a simple sentence. Simple sentences are very basic, they're very easy, and if you use too many of them, your language is going to sound kind of like a child, like a 3-year-old. So we tried to put clauses together to make longer sentences. If we put 2 independent clauses together, we have a compound sentence. For example, we say bamboo is very strong and it can be recycled. So it can be recycled. So it is the subject, can be is the verb, and it can be recycled is a complete thought. So we've got the first independent clause and the second independent clause. And when they are linked together in one sentence, they make a compound sentence. How do we link them together? There's different ways of doing that. Here you can see that we have used a comma before our coordinating conjunction and. Coordinating conjunctions, we have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. We can use those. We can also use a semicolon and a conjunctive adverb and a comma. That's a little more complicated, a little less common. I've got lessons on that in other places on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on my website. You can check that. But for today, let's keep it at a basic level. Okay, let's move on to something slightly more advanced. We've seen how one independent clause makes a simple sentence, 2 independent clauses make a compound sentence. But what happens if we introduce a dependent clause? So if you remember the 3 things that make up an independent clause, subject, verb, and complete thought. Well, when we have a dependent clause, there's no complete thought. So what do I mean by no complete thought? This is something that confuses people a little bit. Well, if we see this example here, because it is very strong. Well, we have a subject, it. We have a verb, is. It is very strong is actually a complete thought. But the word because makes it dependent upon something else. And because we can't see what it is dependent upon, it is not a complete thought. Thus, when we have a dependent clause, we need to attach it to an independent clause. It cannot stand alone. When we use a dependent clause by itself, this is what we call a sentence fragment. And it's a very, very big grammatical mistake. You really want to not do this in your IELTS exam. So what happens if we take an independent clause and a dependent clause and we link them together? Well, this is called a complex sentence. So here we have the example, and I know you can guess it because we've already seen the different parts, but bamboo is a common construction material because it is very strong. I showed you earlier, because it is very strong, it makes no sense on its own, but when we link it to a previous idea, then now we have the logical and grammatical connection and we have our complex sentence. So independent plus dependent clause equals complex sentence. Do we need to always say it like this? Independent first and dependent second? No. Actually, we can put the dependent clause first if we want. And the only difference is that when we do that, we say dependent clause plus comma plus independent clause. Whereas if we flip them around, we say independent clause plus dependent clause with no comma. Although, to be honest, even though this is a rule, it's not an important rule, and you're probably not going to lose marks if you don't obey that one comma thing. Also, you need to know that a dependent clause is going to start with some kind of subordinating conjunction. So words like, as you can see on the screen, when, although, because, while, if. You quite often can see relative clauses are a form of dependent clause. And as you can see from if here, dependent clauses make up conditional sentences. That brings us to the final one, and this is definitely the most difficult one. However, it's probably not as difficult as you think. This is the compound complex sentence. So this sentence is going to have two independent clauses and one dependent clause. Actually, technically, it can have at least two independent clauses and one dependent clause. So here's an example. Sticking with this idea of bamboo, I'm just keeping this one idea consistent so we can see the development. Because it is very strong, bamboo is a common construction material, but Western builders mostly use metal. Okay, so we start with the dependent clause, because it is very strong. Dependent clause comes first, so we then have a comma. Then we say bamboo is a common construction material, so bamboo subject is verb, common construction material, this is a complete thought. But is our coordinating conjunction linked? So we've got our two independent clauses linked with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. And then Western builders mostly use metal. So Western builders is our subject, mostly used as our verb or adverb plus verb. And that is a complete thought. Right, let's review, and we're going to change from bamboo to football, because I don't want you just to think that all of our sentences have to include bamboo for some reason. So simple sentence, we play football. So subject, we, verb, play, complete thought, we play football. It says everything, you don't need anything else to understand it. We can make this into a compound sentence. We play football and they play rugby. So they, subject, play, verb, they play rugby is a complete thought. Complex sentence, right, let's use the subordinating conjunction when to introduce the dependent clause when we're not busy at school. When we're not busy at school, does this mean anything by itself? No, it doesn't. But if we say we play football and then add when we're not busy at school, it makes complete sense. So independent plus dependent clause. And a compound complex sentence, here we've got two independent clauses and one dependent clause, starting with if this time. We play football if it's sunny, and sometimes we play tennis. You'll see there that the order of clauses, it doesn't have to be dependent, independent, independent. We can change it around. So those are the 4 sentence types that we have in English. That's all you need to know in terms of sentence types. If you're using anything else, it's not a real sentence. It's not a proper grammatical sentence. This is fundamental English, and it is so important that you know this and understand this and think in terms of this, especially when you're writing in English for a formal test like the IELTS exam. That's all for today. Good luck if you have a test coming up in the next few days or weeks. Bye-bye.